Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transform their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that often goes unspoken, the power of quitting, with Coonoor Behal. We live in a society that celebrates perseverance and completion. But what about the courage it takes to walk away? How do we discern when it's time to leave a job, a project, or even a life path that no longer serves us? We're here to challenge the stigma surrounding quitting and shed light on how it can be a life-affirming and empowering choice. Whether you're contemplating a major change or simply curious about the stories of those who have left it all behind, this episode will offer you fresh perspectives and valuable insights. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Coonoor Behal, an innovation strategist, creative facilitator, and the founder and CEO of Mindhatch. She is also the author of the thought-provoking book, I Quit, The Life-Affirming Joy of Giving Up. Coonoor's work spans the realms of design thinking, organizational improv, and social change advocacy. And her unique approach has guided major brands like Microsoft and Starbucks, and she's passionate about rethinking the concept of quitting. In her book, Coonoor shares real stories of people who made the bold decision to leave behind what no longer served them, offering a new perspective on how intentional endings can lead to profound new beginnings, which I love. Today, she is going to be sharing her insights on the art of quitting and how we can all learn to embrace it as a pathway to greater fulfillment and growth. So please welcome Coonoor Behal to the show. Coonoor, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. I'm really excited to chat with you. Yeah.
Likewise. I'm so glad we connected. You know, when I saw the title of your book, it was like, before I could even finish the title, I was like, I want to speak to her. I need to talk to her right away. Right? And look, here we are.
Yeah, I had the title before I ever even knew I would do anything with the idea, let alone know it'd be a book. I was like literally getting into bed one night and like this like cadence and music of that Marie Kondo book kind of came to mind. And I was like, oh, I got to write that down, you know? And so, yeah, then it was like a year later that I actually started writing the book. So.
No, that's awesome. Awesome. So thank you again for joining. Let's get into it. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about, you know, your journey to becoming an innovation strategist, the founder of Mindhatch. What sparked all of that? And what are some key experiences that shaped your approach to human-centered design?
Yeah, I often look back on my career trajectory and realize that I kind of design thunk my career into design thinking without even knowing it or having a name for it until much later. I would say kind of the origin really kind of begins in my first career after graduate school, which was in international nonprofit development. And I was not long for that industry for a couple of big important reasons, but one of them was I was just really dissatisfied with the lack of actual problem solving and like the lack of understanding like the beneficiaries of the programs we were running. We weren't really like seeking to deeply understand their experience or even like ask them, you know, what their needs, wants, and desires and constraints were. So it's a little kind of top down, I think, for the way I like to solve problems. And then years later, I look back on that and I was like, oh, you know, what I was trying to do and failing was do human-centered design, you know, but it was years before I had a name for it. And so long story short, I found myself in the private sector because I wanted to get business innovation experience. And while I was in Deloitte Consulting, I learned about design thinking and learned it, helped train other people in it. And for me, it was like a head slap moment is what I often say about it. It was like the second I learned about design thinking, I was like, this should not even be innovative. Like this should be the traditional way of solving business and organizational challenges, and so it was like a fish to water for me. Yeah.
No, without a doubt. I did a similar like design thinking certificate program
Oh
with
yeah.
IDEO a few years ago,
Yeah.
and it was eye opening. To your point around
Yeah.
why aren't we all just doing this, right?
Yeah.
Why does it have to be a thing, if you will?
Totally. Yeah. And I'm very big on how human-centered design, aka design thinking, I'll use both terms interchangeably,
Yeah,
is really like a risk mitigator, and when you compare it to kind of like the traditional, often top down, way of decision making and problem solving in organizations, you're just like, the traditional way is so risky and
right.
resource wasteful. And yeah. So it really latched on to me, like someone who was like previously probably identified as like a linear thinker, kind of like a get in line, and like do the right thing, obey hierarchy, obey authority. When I learned about design thinking, it was like something clicked. I was like, no, like this is actually how my brain thinks. Yeah. So I'd say kind of key experiences that led me here was really just the experiments of previous career choices that helped me learn more about myself. And there's a reason why I chose, a little over 10 years ago to found Mindhatch and do this independently of a large organization. And that kind of experience that I learned was that I wanted to work in a meritocracy. And I felt at the time, and even now, that the best way to do that was to work for myself.
That makes sense. And so, as you mentioned, you've worked across various fields. We mentioned human centered design, improv comedy, which I'd
Yeah.
love to learn more about, Ryan. How did these, truly diverse interests kind of converge into a career that you have now, and how have they influenced each other?
Yeah, well, God, like that primordial ooze of my career at Deloitte Consulting, I owe a lot to the things that I was exposed to and the opportunities I got there. And I happened to get my first internal innovation project at Deloitte the same like month. It might have even been the same week that I took my first improv class. And
Oh, wow.
and so I was kind of like parallel tracking, like learning the basics of innovation and, creative problem solving and learning the foundations of improv comedy. And it was uncanny how identical they were, and so that really put the bug in my ear of like, oh, there's some connection here, and then later, during my tenure at Deloitte, for about a year and a half, only my colleagues knew I was performing improv comedy after hours. I didn't even tell my friends. I was like not out of the closet. I was like, didn't tell my friends. And but I told colleagues, I was like, they're not going to come see me perform. But it was a lesson in kind of like sharing of yourself because my colleagues knew, they were the ones who were like, oh, you know what? We've been reading in HBR and Fast Company and Inc. that like improv can help business stuff, whatever that is, so please come like do a workshop for my clients, or with my team. So it was really kind of my colleagues who kind of like showed me the beginnings of applying improv, to the business world. And so they really connected and they converged. And when I started Mindhatch, it was primarily because I wanted to do human-centered design work exclusively. And I just kind of like almost with like a devil may care attitude was like, you know what? I'm going to do improv also for companies, because I love doing it so much at Deloitte internally. And I really was kind of like, there's a reason why I want to do both these things. There's a reason why they coexist. I don't know what it is right now, but I trusted that it would like reveal itself in time. And sure enough, like that connective tissue just like built and built and built. And I think there's a reason why both of those passions exist in me, like that's the connective tissue. But then, cut to 10 years later, I use human-centered design reference points in my organizational improv work. I definitely use improv expertise in my human-centered design and innovation work. As a facilitator, improv always is an amazing tool. So there's really this like amazing like synergy between all these things that seemed to be random at the time, but they really found their way to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. We talked a little bit about this blend, right? And so, you found Mindhatch 10 years ago, and this blend between design thinking, organizational improv is finding these nice synergies, as you mentioned. So, how, for those who may not be familiar with either,
Yeah.
right? Can you explain how these methods complement each other in helping orgs solve complex problems?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I first of all, I want to say that, I do these things distinctly as well. I think the blending just kind of happens organically because like my expertise spans those things, So if I happen to find that like, oh, a tenet from improv or even an outright improv activity will help get a client somewhere in a human-centered design project, I'll use it. So
Got it.
it's really more in the practice of it that I find a lot of opportunities to blend things, but definitely like they can be delivered distinctly, for sure. And so how they complement each other, like within organizations. So I think there's a lot. Well, not I know I've seen it. I know that there's a lot of similarities. Back to those things that I said I was learning. While I was like learning about innovation at the same time, I was beginning my improv, endeavors. There's a lot of similar like mindsets that then translate into skills. So, I mean, I think like we can say things that are common to both improv performance training and human centered design that are so, similar. One is the act of co creation. That's what improvisers do on stage. They take a very small piece of stimulus and they create something from nothing as a group, right? And same thing in like any kind of innovation, like you're rarely innovating just yourself at your desk, right? It's by definition collaborative, often by definition multidisciplinary, and so I think those kind of like foundational acts of creating value, creating something is very similar. Also in improv, when I'm teaching or coaching or, a lot of it is about responding and reacting to that stimulus, like making the choices based on the information you have. And you're constantly kind of getting new information from your scene partner and building and building. And that's like the yes and of it all. I think similarly in innovation, like you're finding or creating various stimuli and then deciding how best to respond to it. So a big part of the design thinking work I do is research, is getting that deep understanding of customers, users, stakeholders, whoever, is going to be using what you're building, having a deep understanding of them, and having that deep empathy, having to go where they are. And so that is definitely a part of improv as well. The empathy part in improv comes up where I might be gifted playing a character that I just do not agree with in real life, just do not have the same perspective. But you gotta in the moment dig deep and like find a way to portray that character, portray that point of view, right? And so I do think like improv is a really great skill for achieving the things we want to do in human-centered design. Yeah, back to that like stimulus response reaction, in design strategy, design research, as you're doing that research and you're learning more and more about the customer, about the business ecosystem, you're hopefully able to make more and more informed decisions, right? So you are in effect responding to new information, just like how I design thunk my way into this career. I was learning things from various professional experiences and therefore kind of like both narrowing but also expanding what choices I wanted to make into what I'm doing now. And then I think beyond that, both endeavors really require humility and obviously curiosity, and having this humility to be like, I don't know, but I want to know. Right. I often say in my design thinking workshops, like it's really important to fall in love with what you don't know instead of being scared and constrained by it. It's like, what? We don't know that yet, but we want to know it. Let's go find out so we can make better and informed decisions.
No, I love that. And what's interesting about this, I'm curious how you design thunk your role, yourself into this position. Presumably you left consulting to start Mindhatch, right?
I did. Yeah.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about that pivot, right? And what was it that
Yeah.
now took you from being in consulting? You're getting a lot of good feedback from clients and teammates to now start your whole thing, right? Because nature of the show is why people leave. We talk about their most pivotal transition. Tell me about that transition from consulting to now starting your own thing.
Yeah, yeah, God, it was a while ago, but still very, very salient, in my brain. So at the time that I made the decision, I would say fully half of it was actually a non-decision. At that time, 10 plus years ago, in the city I was living, it wasn't like I could go apply for full-time jobs doing this work. It didn't really exist, right? So if I wanted to do this thing that I was passionate about and that I was becoming an expert in, and I wanted to do it full time, as opposed to kind of like a professional development pursuit at my company, I kind of the only choice was to do it on my own, And so it's a little bit of like a non decision, right? And then the other aspect of it, in terms of like the desire to kind of do things a different way and basically run an experiment, run a prototype to see if I could do it. I go back to what I referenced earlier, just kind of like wanting to feel like I worked in a meritocracy, Nobody works in a meritocracy in a company. Just nobody does, right? But that lack of meritocracy benefits only certain people, and I think also I had learned what I wanted to learn. I felt like I really milked my time there, gotten great opportunities, learned a lot, and felt like, oh, I could hang on another few years, but I didn't have much more to learn that I wanted to learn, and so there was that piece as well.
I love that because to your point, and as I was, thinking about the work that you've done and obviously, researching into how you got into this space, I'm like, this is a very niche type of work, right?
Yeah.
And so to go to your point, you're not going on Indeed and finding a job for
Yeah.
something like this, right?
Yeah,
This
definitely
is
not back
this
then. No.
not back then, right? I love that. And I appreciate you sharing that because, a lot of folks who listen to the show have these grand ideas of something, right? But at times don't really know how to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Leaving that comfort zone is often tough. So I appreciate that you share that you just kind of you had to do, right?
Yeah. I also want to speak a bit more to kind of like I was fortunate that I was able to like essentially prototype this career within a bigger company, right? So it wasn't like I was
Yeah,
just
that's
diving
huge.
into something I didn't know anything about, It was more than a hunch. It was a hunch that I had already proven by doing it. And I'm sure that'll come up later in our conversation about, how and when and why to like make a leap, and
Yes.
the size of that leap might vary. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, when it comes to the types of brands that you've worked with now coming back to some of your current work, you maybe share like a memorable project where some of these strategies made a significant impact. And I would imagine too, for those who may not be familiar, like when you come in and they're not familiar with the type of work that you do, to then get the buy-in for something like this, who you may have some naysayers, right? But to get that buy-in and then to actually see the success, what type of memorable work can you share that you've been a part of?
Yeah, I definitely share a couple of like formative project experiences, especially when I'm teaching people design thinking, and I'm basically like I'm an evangelist for what I do, right? Not that there's no reason to poke holes in it, but one of the stories I find myself sharing a lot is I did a project. It was focused on design research, so like with actual customers, and it was for a really big, well-known national retail bank. And I was part of a team that this bank had come to, and they basically like they had like a business idea. Let's say that
Got it.
they were like, "Hey, we think this big subset of our customers, they don't want to talk to human beings. They don't want to go to bank tellers. They don't want to call 1-800 numbers. They want to do everything digitally. So we want to like basically prove that, you know." Now, the business subtext to this, and this was their business desire, was they wanted to get proof or evidence that they can just fire a lot of human beings who deliver service, right? It was pretty
Okay.
transparent.
Yeah.
That was a challenge they were trying to solve, was like cost cutting, right? Very business motivated challenge. And so they were like, oh, this audience we have, this kind of persona, like we want to basically see like, how many people we can fire that and then not affect their experience. And so after only one round of research, we went and did in-depth interviews in people's homes, actually, in
Oh, wow.
Boston and in Washington, D.C. And we immediately heard things that, yes, kind of verified the hunch. We heard things like, I don't ever want to talk to a human being. I don't ever want to go to a bank. We were hearing these things. But the other thing we were constantly hearing was, but I need to feel like my bank cares about me. Basically, like that causes like a reframe, and I go back to kind of like human centered design is really useful to help you make sure you're solving the right problem at the right time for the right people. So, yes, this client, sure, yes, this group of people, they don't want to talk to human beings. You're right about that. But what you're actually going to be solving for is then how do we make them feel cared for in digital only channels, right? That now becomes the scope of the project of like how do we do that, and that helps them avoid a lot of wasted resources, a lot of failure, because now they're solving for the right thing. They're
Right.
solving for also an emotional aspect of the experience they're delivering and also trying to take away. So it's kind of like, okay, hold up. You still have to meet customers' needs. Like it might be in a different channel, but like the core emotional need is not changing just because they're
Yeah.
doing things digitally.
Yeah. And I love that. It's like they didn't want the human contact, but they still wanted the humanity of like the
Exactly,
humanity to be
exactly.
seen.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
like a nice little nugget to try to figure out. Like, oh my God, how do we like make people feel cared for in the
Right.
absence of human contact? Like how
I
do we
love
do that?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that a lot. Let's talk a little bit about your book, right? So you had this great book. I quit the life-affirming joy of giving up, right? And you explore the concept of really reframing quitting. And so, how does this idea connect with the work you do in fostering creativity and innovation in organizations?
Yeah, so when I wrote the book, it wasn't at all intended to be like a calling card for Mindhatch. It was quite honestly just an idea that I had just been stuck in my head for like by that point 7 years, and I
Oh,
didn't know what to
wow.
do with it. It just wouldn't leave my head. I was like, I love quitting, and these are the reasons why. I'm sure I'm not the only one, and so really like the kernel of it, I think, came from honestly, like I referenced earlier, like my design thinking my own career, understanding that, like when I joined my NGO, I thought I was going to do that work for the rest of my life. I got a graduate degree in it. I wanted to be a social do gooder. And then within like 3 months, I knew no, and so you could call that like a failure or a mistake. But really, what I got was like new information I would not have gotten in any other way. And now it's like,
Great.
what am I going to do with that information? And it's not only information about the industry, but about myself, what my values are and what I'm willing to trade off. And so I think there is this connection point to like that personal experience of mine. And along the way, realizing that I loved taking those risks, and that they were always positive. It was always like progress and momentum towards what I actually wanted out of life, labor, and love, to be honest.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of connection with creativity, innovation, simply because of like the mindsets, and how you seek truth as well. Yeah.
No, I love that. And one of the things I noticed, the book, you explore the positive aspects of quitting really as an intentional and empowering choice, right? Which I could definitely resonate with as I've navigated my own career, right? So, how can really someone distinguish between quitting as a healthy decision versus a reaction to a temporary challenge in a job?
Yeah, that like reactivity is oftentimes like not always the best thing for us, you know. I remember even when I was like wanting to leave my company and start Mindhatch, I felt like I was being impulsive. I was like, "Oh my god, like I can't start another career," you know. I was like all of 30 at the time, you know, and that felt old, you know. And so um so dumb. But I was like it felt impulsive. And a friend of mine had to point out, like, dude, Coonoor, you've been talking about this for like 9 months. Like, it's not impulsive, you know? And like, so I really had to kind of like understand that I wasn't being reactive or impulsive. I was actually kind of like contemplating what was a good match for me. And so I think, and surely some people have experiences of making really impulsive decisions, and it's great for them, right? But I think what I come back to is that to to kind of like have that progression, that momentum towards like who you are, what you want to be, what you want to do, without regret. You know, I think what I've observed through like the stories that I gathered for the book is that it really helps if you know what your values are, right? Um, what your risk tolerance is, because we don't all have to have the same risk tolerance. And then what your trade offs are, right? What you're willing
Oh, that's a good one.
to trade off, right?
Yeah.
And knowingly trade off, right? I think all of that kind of adds up to like having self knowledge, right? And questioning your decisions or non decisions, you know? And a big part of the book also is that, you know, not quitting is a decision. You know, we like to think we're just taking a beat and not taking any action, but not quitting is an action. It is a decision. And so if you can kind of think of it that way, then that opens up the possibility for you to say, hey, is me not quitting this meeting my values, matching my risk tolerance? Is it a good trade-off, you know, for me? Yeah. So I think what I see in what in the book I call happy quitters, you know, is this like knowledge of themselves and what they want. Sometimes they learn it the hard way, of course, like many of us do. But then they're willing to act, you know?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I love that you say that, because I think about some of the tenets of this show. I really want people to make better decisions. Like people are like, oh, are you trying to get people to go? I don't care if you quit or not, right? I just want you to make better informed decisions about the things you do at work, and really recognize, like you talked about values and things like that. What is it that you say you're into, right? And are you truly kind of living in alignment with that? You know, I got my start from the pandemic and the Great Resignation. And so hearing people and seeing people really sit with themselves, truly because they didn't have a choice, right?
Yeah.
But sit with themselves and really start asking themselves those tough questions. You see these beautiful stories start to unfold in some of the work that I'm doing, right? So as I see there's a lot of parallels in some of the work that you've done as well, which, you know, kind of leads me to some of the stories that you've highlighted. And so you talk about a lot of people who have found this fulfillment after leaving situations that really no longer serve them. And fun fact, I learned most of these stories are from women, right?
Right. A
And
lot
a
are.
large,
Yeah.
right. And a large part of my viewership and listenership are women as well. And so can you share maybe how some of these stories reflect that idea that leaving a job isn't just about escaping this negative situation, but also about pursuing new, meaningful, more intentional type of opportunities?
So the stories in the book, there's multiple sections, and like quitting jobs and careers is one of the sections. There's a section on quitting aspirations, quitting identities, quitting relationships, and quitting habits as well. And I think like you're right. And I think about it, like the majority of the interviews and stories are from women. And I didn't know most of the people before I interviewed them for the book. They were complete strangers to me until we got on a Zoom call, you know? And so part of
Same.
me, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I basically just put out a call. I was like, here's my scheduler. Tell people to sign up, you know, if they want to share a quitting story with me. And I want to maybe just take a little guess. Like my book is by no means statistically, valuable, right? It's qualitative stories, a finite number of them. But I think there might be some connection to why it was mainly women who signed up to speak with me. I think there might be like maybe a greater comfort with vulnerability and kind of like saying, you know what, I got it wrong, and it didn't work for me. And I made a difference. I took a risk, and so there might be something there to like just the selection bias of who opted in to speak with me. On the job section, particularly, you and I chatting just before this conversation, it was the first time I realized like, oh yeah, all of the stories in that section happen to be from women, and they quit their careers for very different reasons. One quit because of pregnancy discrimination. One quit because she had been so successful in her career as a trapeze artist that she was like, I've done it all. I've done it. I'm satisfied. I like met my goals, And so to someone quitting being a doctor and actually regretting the way she did it. And now she counsels physicians in leaving the field and to do it a better way than she did, to like take care of themselves, take care of their families, And so there's a lot of different reasons because of course, like we're not all the same, right? I think like the through lines are still similar. There's like this knowledge of self. And a lot of times we get that knowledge when we're up against it, like when shit's going down and it doesn't feel good to us, then it's like, wait, why does this not feel good? And like when I was at my NGO and I just was told, you know what, just go copy and paste that grant proposal from 20 years ago. We're just going to do that again, even though it had no impact, no benefit. That did not sit well with me, and like with hindsight, I know with more clarity, like why. But yeah, I think like in those moments, like figuring out like, okay, why does this feel bad? Why am I not wanting to put up with this? I was conversely willing to make the trade-off of making no money for the rest of my life, and by staying in an NGO environment. But we all have those different trade-offs, and it's, I think in the stories about quitting jobs, you see that conflict and battle that comes, whether it's societal pressure, family pressure, just like preordained notions we have of what should be a part of our life, and really kind of like unshackling yourself from those expectations enough to like look within yourself and be like, okay, what am I about? What do I want to be about?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. When you look back on this, because I know it's been some time since you've kind of worked on the book and released it. Looking back or thinking about that process, what did you really start to learn? Like when you were after hearing all these stories and then thinking about your own story, did you see yourself in some of these things? Like what started to just really start clicking for you from a humanity standpoint as you were going through that process?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think what clicked with me was that I was like, I can't be the only one who has benefited from quitting and like loves quitting, and wants to like evangelize quitting and like remove the stigma that we have applied to it, A fun fact, the self-help guru who coined the phrase quitters never win and winners never quit was a con man. So it's like sometimes it pays to look at the origins of our societal expectations, and
Right.
look at them within that context. So I think for me, it was personally edifying to just find other people who like had it from firsthand experience, very different experiences from mine, came to the same conclusions. I mean, there's stories in there that on the face of it sound a little frivolous, like I quit drinking soda. But when you read the story, like it is about values, and about priorities. And it was a struggle, to like commit to that. And then there's like really, really like challenging stories around like quitting like like drugs, and leaving whole communities, that weren't right for you. So I think like there's a real variety of experiences, most of which I don't have any personal experience with. And I think it was kind of like a lesson in what I do as a design researcher. It's just like
Right.
asking people questions and like seeking to understand, and understand them. And so it felt very familiar in that way, like running those interviews to kind of get to the deeper core of people's actions. And sometimes like when I was speaking to people, they didn't know, or I hadn't really articulated maybe like the deeper understanding and values that their actions represented until I asked them about it. We got to go deep on those things.
As I'm listening to you, I'm like, I knew this was going to be a good conversation because there's so many things that you experienced in kind of creating and developing the book. And obviously you talk about more quitting than just job stuff, but it touches, a chord with me, strikes a chord with me, because I too have started, seeing that. And I'm reaching out, I'm a random person reaching out for these things. And just to hear folks go through that thought process, oftentimes live in the conversations, because they haven't really, and especially some of my earlier conversations, I just caught them probably right in like, oh, I resigned like 7 months ago or four
Yeah.
months ago. And so I'm still figuring this all out. And so you hear that and you see it and you're just like, oh, wow, there's so many things that people are going through, and just to hear their why, I think it's important. So no, you definitely answered the question for sure. Would love to talk to you a little bit about future work, right? Because I know it's something you're very passionate about. How do you see, and really tie it back to, your current work now, how do you see the role of human-centered design evolving in the future, right? Especially in the context of employee engagement, company culture. We have this whole battle with, right, work from home, hybrid, all this stuff in the office. So how do you see the role of human-centered design evolving in this space?
Yeah, it's interesting because, human centered design is like a methodology. It's like a collection of tools, that as an expert, you kind of get very good at knowing how to assemble the right tools for the right thing, and it's by definition kind of like nonlinear, right? Like there's some core principles that make it different from like traditional ways of doing things. But in terms of like the methods itself changing, I don't know. I think it probably comes down to kind of just like the kinds of tools that we now have available. I think AI is going to change and add on to the discipline. But I also think human centered design needs to be a part of the conversation with AI for sure. So I think that there's like some avenues there for the future of the discipline. And with work, particularly, it's interesting to even be asked the question about the evolution of human centered design, because it is not yet saturated the market and the way we
Good
do
point.
things, the way we work, it's still considered innovative, and so I think there's still a lot of impact to be had even pre-evolution. But I think a lot of the evolution can come in like the application of it, like human-centered design is like applied innovation, applied creative problem solving, and so I think there's a lot always going to be like new areas where it can be applied, including employee experience, like using that approach to design employee experiences and like looking at our employees as consumers or users, and treating them with the same care and concern, as we might the people who are buying our stuff, and so I think that will continue. I mean, like my understanding of like the history of this work is that it really kind of came from IDEO and like product design, like in like the 70s and 80s, and one reason why I think it's like still kind of new and innovative is because it's not being applied to the business world, which has not been used to like, frankly, even taking any kind of a social science approach to solving problems. It's often a lot of like, just who's the most highly paid person in the biggest stuffed leather chair, and we're going to do what they say, and that still persists, And in fact, an article I've written that is like about how design thinking and human centered design is essentially the scientific method for innovation, So it's not new, it's just the application to a new world and a new purpose. And so I think those applications will continue to change, and there'll be more universes in which human-centered design can create value.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Now I want to move into a little bit about advice, right? Advice for others. People love this section of the show because it really gives them some
Right.
actionable steps, right? Right. And so I want you to think about, let's say for individuals who are considering a career shift, maybe, or even starting their own venture like you did in the past, right? What key advice would you give, especially regarding embracing uncertainty and taking what may be seen as unconventional paths?
Part of that answer is going to be something that I don't think we've talked about as yet, but something that I really clicked into in writing the book, was that most things we think are risky are not as risky as we think they are, as society wants us to think it is, and of course, we all have the right to our own risk tolerance. But I think time and time again in these stories, particularly on the job quitting stories, I heard like, oh my God, I thought the world was going to end if I didn't keep doing this thing that was no longer working for me. And then I quit it and the world didn't end, and like, not only that, but more opportunities opened up, right? To do the thing that they wanted. And that's kind of the point of like quitting, I think should be perceived as progress, and courage and moving towards something. And not just like the removal or absence of something, you're not moving into a vacuum, right? For early career folks, I say it's kind of like run those experiments. Like if you're curious about something, find ways to test it. For example, like way back when I was in a transition mode after grad school, and I thought I wanted to work in philanthropy, like a foundation. And after 2 or 3 just coffee chats with people, I was like, no, I don't want to do that, And so I'm saying like experiments and information gathering can be as small as that. At the opposite end, our experiment might be 10 years in a certain career, but we learn things along the way that makes us be like, you know what, that experiment is over. I'm ready to take action on what I've learned from it. So to early career folks, I'd say just kind of be aware of like what you're learning, what you're not learning, if you're learning anything at all, I think is a good thing as well. I also want to say to early career folks that and this is something that really hit home for me when I was interviewing people for the book as well. I think it has to be said is that a lot of times, particularly with jobs on careers, quitting is a privilege, right? It's an act of privilege.
Yeah, you're right about that.
And so I don't want to like give short shrift to that. We all work within our own risk tolerances, and our own abilities. But I tell you what, I mean, billion-dollar companies are risk averse, so it's like assets don't necessarily correlate to risk tolerance. But I do want to say that like I personally experienced that like when I decided to get a divorce, like the second I decided it, I felt this like wash of privilege come over me that I could even make that decision, that I could no, I wouldn't be physically harmed. I would still have a roof over my head. This constellation of privileges even allowed me to make the decision to quit a marriage, So I want to just make sure that like that's understood, and it's okay if you're like quitting within your own constellation of privileges. So, and hopefully as you progress in your career, those privileges increase, and so you have more choices. I think a lot of times in careers, like it's so ass backwards to me, like that there is this like assumption. I think it's a reality where like the further along you are in your career, the more narrow and focused you are, right? And then people feel like they can't do anything else because they've been doing it for so long, And I think that's really unfortunate because I'm just kind of like, that's so illogical. It's like the more experience you have, the more you should be capable of doing, And so I'd also kind of like give that, advice to early career folks. Yeah.
I love that. And now, given your experience kind of guiding others through change and innovation, what are some maybe practical steps people can take to maybe cultivate a mindset that's open to creativity and adaptability in their professional lives?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be so many, and I'm going to have like my own little corner of the world and the bias that comes with it, and we can debate the definition of practical in all of this, but I'm going to take the word practical to mean like, what are actions you can take, and so I suggest for anyone in any phase of life, like do improv, try improv. You never have to get on a stage. I didn't, for the first couple of years. Just like take classes, get that muscle memory of what it feels like to actually collaborate and to actually be vulnerable. And another great thing that improv does is like, by nature of improvising off of almost nothing, you are needing to take action in the absence of complete information all the time, and that's what life is. That's what quitting decisions are. Like we can wait and wait and wait until we have 100% information, but you're never going to get 100% information. It's just never going to happen, So I think improv helps cultivate that muscle of like getting comfortable, taking action, making a decision, even when you don't know everything. Because knowing everything is a false construct of life. And so I definitely advocate for taking improv classes, bringing improv into your companies as well, like applied improv, to businesses, to organizational culture. There's a lot of impact to be had there. And I think another thing that I think I personally have benefited from is just being multi-passionate, don't be a one-trick pony in your own life. Or if you do have one pony, like make sure it's like proliferative, and gives you access to a lot of different ways of thinking and ways of doing.
Right.
Yeah, I think like I often, I didn't start doing improv till later in life, but a lot of the things that understandably scare people about doing improv, I didn't have those fears. I think I always had like the heart of an improviser before I even started doing improv. And so for me, it was a process of like realizing that, and not that it wasn't scary for me at the beginning, for sure. Like I said, I didn't tell my friends I was doing improv for a year and a half. But yeah, I think like having multiple passions allows you to connect dots that like other people can't. I think cultivating that mindset also includes like this balance of critical thinking and knowledge collection, but also humility, going back to the like fall in love with what you don't know.
No, I love that. And now looking forward, what's the future hold for Coonoor? So
Oh
what
my
type of impact are you
God.
hoping to have in the future?
Oh my God. I'm just trying to finish my morning coffee, Brian. Man. So I think like well, certainly like I referenced before, I hope to live to see the day where human-centered design and its like adjacent tools are no longer considered innovative. I just hope I live to see the day where like Coonoor is a traditional business consultant. Let's bring her in, and so um uh yeah, so I hope to see that happen. That it becomes a traditional way of thinking and working and problem solving. I think also when I think about the future, I kind of just I'm happy with like a small life, but like a small life like lived largely, I suppose, like and what I mean by that is like for me impacting a single other person I interact with means a lot, and doesn't mean less than say impacting greater society, or millions of people. So I'm happy with like that quantity of small interactions that create impact. Yeah. And I think just like hoping to continue to evangelize these methods and get other people passionate about them, and just like refine these methods and the disciplines as I go along.
I love that. I love that. And now, what's one question you have for me
Oh
that
my
I could
God.
hopefully answer?
Okay, you asked me like 100 questions. I got to ask you one.
I
That's not
know.
fair.
Hey, if you want to do two, I'm open.
Okay.
I'm open.
Well, I think I had like two questions for you. I'd like to know how you came to be interested in quitting, because it seems like obviously you're a fan of it. So how did you become a fan of it as opposed to what most people are raised to be, which is fearful of it?
Yeah. So I initially got really interested in this topic during the pandemic because, truthfully, out of pure curiosity, I did not understand why people would leave stability during a time of instability. It just didn't make sense to me. Granted, I have, I was on my own, internal 3-year rotationals with jobs, prior to that. But, and I could get that. Yeah, you try to get to a point and it doesn't work out. It's time to move on. But I just didn't get why someone would leave during this chaos, once in a lifetime experience that we're going through nationwide. Why are you leaving? And so I just truthfully, I went down the rabbit hole and I just wanted to know more because the articles that I was reading didn't give me what I wanted to know. And so I wanted to say, like, hey, I know Coonoor's got something to say here because they gave her a couple lines in this article, but no, I want to know more. So then my question was, to your point of, writing on your notebook on the nightstand, I just couldn't sleep one night and it hit me. I was like, you know what? What if people would tell their own stories? But to me, what would I do? Why I left. Oh, I should write that down. And so for me, it was my notes app. 3 a.m. I woke up and I typed out the intro. And so that's how I knew this was different than all the many other ideas that I'd had in the past. So that's how I got really interested in this. And then as the show has continued to progress, you start seeing these consistent themes globally that really lend credence to one of my big themes about, positive me. I'm thinking about positively impacting the human experience. This is one of the many things that we all do, work to live, right? And I wanted to just start telling those stories because, to your earlier point as well, this quitting is such a taboo topic, and I don't want it to be that. So I'm one of the voices, you're another voice, right? And so I'm like, that's how I got into this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I am so grateful that you started the podcast, because the same moment, like in probably 2020, 2021, that you were getting this idea, I was being told by people in my world, especially like younger people, do a podcast. Don't write a book, do a podcast. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do a podcast. And so and that was in the lead up to I didn't know I was going to do anything with this idea until a week before I did, and I was kind of like, yeah, it's a book. It's going to be a book. I don't want to do a podcast. So anyway, Brian, thank you for doing the podcast.
Thank you.
Instead of me. And so I appreciate that. Yeah. My second question for you is what's the next thing that you want to quit?
Ooh, wow. I don't know if quit's the right word, but I would say, I would say I'm very dedicated and focused on a lot of things. But I say one of the things I want to quit, and this is, and for folks who are listening, they're going to probably laugh at me, but I want to quit at times talking myself out of things, talking myself out of doing certain things, right? As an example, right? I have, some pretty large athletic goals, right? About doing certain things, but some of them from a financial reasons or whatever, you're like, oh, stop talking yourself out. Just figure, do what I normally do for the show. Just figure it out. Just figure the thing out. So that's one thing I want to quit, right? As I enter this kind of, new phase in my life, I want to make sure that I quit making excuses for certain things, because I think that's impacted me negatively in the past. And I'm trying not to make the same mistake again.
Yeah.
Thank you. So great questions. Look at that. A little twofer from Coonoor. I love that. I love that.
I'm in control now, Brian.
You are in control. Well, look, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure hearing your story, hearing more about your work, and would love for you to share where our listeners can find you and support the work that you do at Mindhatch, your book, or anywhere.
Thanks so much for that opportunity. Well, you can find my professional work, my human-centered design and employee engagement work at mindhatchllc.com. Please reach out if there's anything that I can do to support your team or your company in solving people and business problems in much better ways. And the book, of course, it's on Amazon. It's also on bookshop.org. Yay, small booksellers. Please just buy the book and read it. And if you loved it, please leave a review. I'm a small time author, so like quite literally every review is meaningful and helpful to getting the word out there. You can also go to iquitbook.com, and there's some more resources on there, including the ability to get the I Quit toolkit that can help guide you through a lot of things we talked about: values, trade-offs, risk, and to kind of getting your own list of quits together.
Love that. Love that. Well, thank you for that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Coonoor Behal for joining us today. I'll share all of her info in the show notes, and I hope you all have a great week. Hope you got a lot out of this. We'll definitely see you next time. Thank you again, Coonoor.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyiLeft.co. That's whyiLeft.co. And subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Alive Podcast Network. See you soon.